Dear friends and colleagues, I'm glad to meet you again. So I'm greet you on my YouTube channel. The name of my YouTube channel is Вадим Сирота, banking expert. You can ask me any question of your interest here. And so please become a subscriber, tip the button like, send my videos to your friends, colleagues, and enjoy this channel, the channel of the useful information for correct decisions. Let's start our today's conversation. And so I'd like to discuss with you now today the topic of the implications on global financial system of the war in Ukraine. I'd like to say you that, in my opinion, there is a minor direct impact of this war conflict on the world, on the global financial system. This partly may be explained by the fact that the financial systems and banking systems of Ukraine and Russia are not great players, great actors in the world financial system. They haven't, these both countries haven't well developed, and financial markets, such financial markets are not deep enough with respect to their domestic economy size, as well as the financial needs of their producers, their customers, etc. And mention, please, this one fact, that there is a well-known ranking, the Global Financial Centers Index. This ranking is created by the China Development Institute and the Yen Partners Consultancy in London. So the alliance of think tank and consultancy. And in the latest 31st edition published in March, in the list of world leading financial hubs, there were included two Russian-based financial centers. Moscow was placed on the 51st position, while St. Petersburg was placed 97. Unfortunately for Ukraine native, Ukraine-born person, the Ukrainian financial hubs are permanently absent in such ranking. The other item of analysis will be connected with the direct exposures of Western banks to their client, to their partners in Ukraine. So please let me to demonstrate you some graphs. Okay, wait for a minute. So let's discuss first of all the exposures of the banks from the European Union. It's for the end of September 2021. The total size of such exposures of the European Union's banks was approximately 116 billion euros. In the United States dollars, it was approximately 128 billions. So it was noticing that these exposures are currently at the risks because of the need for business to leave Russian market because of sanctions, or because of damages caused by Russian aggression to Ukraine's economy. So the on balance sheet exposures comprises for the biggest part of these financial commitments, and balance sheet exposures were aggregate 76.2 billion euro. At the same time, of off-balance sheet exposures was at approximately 40 billion euros. And you may be surprised, but you may be not surprised that the banks from continental Europe are the biggest lenders to such economies. Mostly we shall focus on Russian economy due to its size, due to its greater involvement in the world financial markets. And so Italian and French banks have the largest exposures, approximately 25 billion euros each of these countries. And they were followed by Austrian banks with approximately 17.5 billion euros. Not European banks, but we shouldn't forget about the banks from the United States. The exposures of such banks total on approximately 14.7 billion United States dollars. I use the data from the Bank of International Settlements to describe this exposure size. And when I revealed you the total exposures of the European banks to Russia, I dealt with the data of the European Banking Authority. Please mention this. And what is interesting for us, it is important to notice the influence of such volumes in terms of the influence on their domestic financial and banking systems. It is proposed to use indicators of exposures to Russia and Ukraine as percent of banking system equity, of domestic, the domestic banking system equity. So I'd like to present you the data from Moody's Investor Services. The most exposed are banks from Italy and France, but in terms of the influence on their native financial systems, the most exposed and under the highest level of risk due to this war conflict is Austrian financial and banking system. Please mention that blue line is the indicators for Russia. So the parts of equity, the exposures of to Russia banks are account for 13%, more than approximately 15% of bank system equity for Austria. And for Ukraine, it's a little bit higher than 3%. Please mention that exposures to Russia banks from Italy financial institutions approximately 9% of the banking system equity. For France, its figure is 4%. Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany. And for Ukraine, approximately less than 1% is exposures of banking system equity for France. The two big banking players are present in Ukraine. It's Crédit Agricole and BNP Paribas. We may analyze this data, but I'll propose you to take to pay your attention more to the specific banks and banking institutions having exposures and having investments in Ukraine. What European groups are the leaders in terms of exposures to these countries being in war conflict? I use the data from Bloomberg agency, and you may notice that the most exposed banks are Raiffeisenbank Aval and Raiffeisenbank International, excuse me. She bought one of the local biggest bank Aval a few decades ago, and in Ukraine, but the Russian Federation is the core market for this Austrian financial conglomerate too. So the total size of these exposures is 22.9 billion euros. The next biggest bank in such terms is French Société Générale, having 18.6 billion euros exposures. Then Italian banking group UniCredit with 14.52 billion euros exposures. Deutsche ING group having 6.7 billion euro exposures. Italian Intesa Sanpaolo having 5.6 billion French Crédit Agricole approximately 5 billion euros, and Germany's Commerzbank. What is important that in the described in the all but Raiffeisen Bank International, for mostly majority of the presented banking groups, the part of business of subsidiaries in Russia and Ukraine isn't core business. The total loans in portfolios of French and Italian banks, the subsidiaries in Russia and Ukraine, are not higher than 2%. For example, French Crédit Agricole, it represents 0.6% the total lending portfolio. Société Générale 1.7% of total exposures, but please turn to the graphic connected with the risk for domestic banking system for Austria, and turn our eye on such situations that the loans to Russia and Ukraine make up 11.5% of credit portfolio of Raiffeisen Bank International Group. So Austrian banks have potentially the biggest level of losses, and it is the issue for authoritative such banking group as Raiffeisen how to continue their operation in the core markets in Central and Eastern Europe. It means Ukraine and Russia market. The other item of our special interest is the investments in sovereign debts of Russia and Ukraine. Investments originated from world-leading financial hubs. It was considering that the sovereign debt market is an important element of establishing financial ties with developed financial institutions, world-leading financial institutions. It's of special interest for special type of investors, especially for Ukraine, of vulture funds. It was noticing also, but its exposures is a tiny fraction. Exposures to Russia, for example, is a tiny fraction of the global traded sovereign bond portfolio. The total size of such traded portfolio is higher than $1 trillion United States dollars. And Russian exposures, please take your attention. Before sanctions started, there was such Russian sovereign bonds were presented in JP Morgan's fixed income emerging market indices, and its weight was approximately 1% from such total amount of traded sovereign debts across the globe. So mention this side. Mention please this, and the issue of special interest is the corporate debts of Russia. Please turn back to this. illustration to this graph, it was noticing that the sovereign exposures isn't the main item for generate risk in such situation. Hard currency denominated exposures are approximately 40 billions United States dollars, and about a half of such investments are made by foreign investments. But please notice that the total size of foreign debt of Russian corporates, both in rubles and hard currencies, is approximately 490 billion United States dollars of United States is total. And while the sovereign indebtedness graph sovereign debt is presented here, but other sectors, corporates, loans to investments, subsidiaries, and banks, including quasi-sovereign corporates, are also of a special danger. And according to the experts of Economist Intelligence Unit, the total size of these obligations and the risk of default is 390 billion United States dollars. So when we speak about the sovereign default of Russia, we should notice the size of this indebtedness mentioned, please. And it was considering that there is significant exposures in internal sovereign debt, in local sovereign debt, rubles denominated. It's worth 38 billion United States dollars, or approximately 20% of outstanding debt to be paid. But you may compare this side. So I mentioned about this one indebtedness, and it's in hard currency, sovereign debt. So to compare the size of corporate sector indebtedness with sovereign exposures, you see that the main area of risks as for Russia is corporate sector. And please mention that in Ukraine, we also have the problem, the issue of investments in sovereign debts. In Project Syndicate website, it was published in May a very interesting research concerning the ability of Ukraine to pay back its debt, sovereign debt, and it was analyzed the total situation with indebtedness, sovereign, sovereign indebtedness, external debt, and so I'd like to present you some figures that the total indebtedness is approximately 57 billion United States dollars, more than a quarter of Ukraine's GDP, and investors of Euro bonds also invested 22.7 billion United States dollars in such type of financial obligations of the country. The debt before IMF is 13.5 billion United States dollars. Ukraine also a headache for the International Monetary Fund it was considering, and 6.5 billion United States dollars owed to on bilateral official loans, maybe interstate, maybe other development financial institutions, etc. And please mention that kleptocracy is a common issue for all such post-Soviet republics, and some financial institutions, some Western financial institutions are endangered because they have the wide client base consisting of Ukraine's and Russia bureaucrats, tycoons, kleptocrats of different types, and their business models under the threat. Please mention the side of this issue. Most of all, we should pay attention that during the war conflict in Ukraine, we observe the war competition of the leaders of world ranking of chronic capitalism. According to this ranking from The Economist, the latest placed in March of this year, Russia holds its position as top placed, the first place in the ranking of chronic capitalism states. Ukraine is placed 5th. So it's not surprisingly that kleptocrats and owners of illicit funds try to use world's leading hubs, financial hubs, to deal with their wealth. London, the city of London, is the leading place to deal with such illicit funds, and kleptocrats from these countries prefer to rely on its wide network of enablers, auditors, lawyers, etc., and they use the city of London to legalize, legitimize, and hide their wealth, sometimes dubious of dubious origin, etc. And according to the Ministry of Defense of United Kingdom, given the fact that this excessive importance of the city of London for the global financial system and for the whole British economy, it was considering that the city of London is especially vulnerable in terms of economic warfare. For the danger is from the political influence on such kleptocrats by authoritarian regime in Kremlin. The dangers may arise due to weak financial prospects of local tycoons. They need to withdraw their funds from the financial institutions based in the city of London. And the other one aspect is that the British National Crime Agency estimated the direct loss from money laundering is equal to 100 billion funds. It's colossal damage to British economy, and it's not surprisingly that the authoritative world leading think tanks Chatham House in December this year, a few months before the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, Russia's invasion in Ukraine, published a special report to deal with the kleptocracy and determine the funds, illicit funds of post-Soviet kleptocrats as the threat to the national security of the United Kingdom. Please mention this important aspect. In my opinion, this aspect is more important than the direct financial exposures of the Western banks to the banks and counterpartners in Ukraine and Russia. This is a more important issue to deal with. And of course, I think that not direct potential financial losses, but the situation of such war conflict is the litmus test of United States dollar dominance across the globe. What is important, and this issue will be described and researched, investigated in details in my next videos being presented on this YouTube channel. Vadim, Sirota, banking expert, so please subscribe on tip the bottom like and send these videos to your friends and colleagues. And into some aspects of this issue is that in the area of finance, we consider it to move to multipolar financial order, which when this order will be featured by breaking the monopoly of United States dollars. Some researchers think that we in the nearest future we will face the competition of two monetary blocks, one headed by United States with its currency dollar, and the European Union, its allies in the other bank of the Atlantic Ocean, with having its own currency euro, and the other bloc China will be leaders of the other bloc. It will include the growing Asian economies, and including Russia as a geopolitical ally of Chinese empire, newborn empire. But in my opinion, we shouldn't use the logic of Cold War or Iron Curtain in the current globalized world of intertwined financial flows. It's impossible, in my opinion. I'll present my ideas and my arguments then in next later in next episodes. But what is important that the sanctions were widely used to limit Russia's ability to increase their military aggression to Ukraine. Sanctions, the Western sanctions, are believed the core instrument of containment policy directed on Russia, and it is believed to make significant damage to Russia's economy and financial system. But currently we can't feel the immediate results of such sanction. Disruptive effects, I mean. And it was considering that the weaponization of sanctions, of Western sanctions, mostly by US, has an unintended consequences and implication. That the other countries are struggling to find an alternatives to the core elements of financial infrastructure they used to serve their trading and financial flow. And some they tried to mitigate the potential threats and financial damage and losses, and in some way maybe or even safeguard their financial and economic sovereignty. Please mention that the strategy of Russia's economy development was to build a fortress economy, and the dollarization was the fundamental element of such strategy. The Russians top officials stimulated the leveraging to paying back debts in hard currency. They declined the share of the United States dollars in the foreign exchange reserves of the Central Bank of Russia, and we could observe the mitigating the role of United States dollars as the currency to facilitate fossil fuels transactions. So Russian Federation reoriented their commodities trade flows on settlements, on transactions in euros, not United States dollars. So in the other side, on the other hand, the economic United States rivals try to develop their own alternatives of dollar-based financial infrastructure. For example, they try to avoid their holdings of foreign exchange reserves denominated in the United States dollars. China tried to develop the alternative to SWIFT payment network. Russia tried to develop their payment systems as rivals to Visa and MasterCard. In my opinion, Russia didn't succeed in this, but attempts were obvious. Please mention that China's cross-border interbank payment system, the analog of SWIFT, but which mostly relies on SWIFT, and the Russian equivalent of such systems, they both handle approximately 0.5% of transactions of SWIFT's volume. So currently, the opponents, economic opponents of Western world, haven't succeeded in developing their own competing financial infrastructure. But this trend is obvious, and I don't know. I tried to research and present to you my ideas whether such attempts will be successful and whether then realize in the multipolar global financial order. So thank you for your attention. Please comment, tip the button like, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Nice to meet you. Bye-bye.